Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. In this video I'm going to be making some new brackets for the railings on the bow of my speedboat. So the boat in question is a Glastron SSV-153. So basically the current ones are corroded and they're not really holding the railings in place anymore. And despite extensive searching online, I couldn't find any replacements available to buy. So I decided to make my own from scratch. So keep watching to find out how I did it. So I've bought some 316 stainless plate and tube. My plan is to weld the tube onto the plate, so I'm going to cut it at the right angle at the bottom here and then basically weld it onto the plate, which I'll then screw to the deck of the boat. So to begin with, I'm just making some templates from cardboard that I'm going to use to cut the parts. So the first template is for getting the angle of the tube correct, and then the second one is to get the shape, the general shape of the base plate. So I'm now in the garage with the templates I've just made. So I'm going to start by cutting the tube to the right length and angle. I'm going to somehow mount the tube with a guide so that I can basically use the guide to direct the angle grinder. That's my template for the plate. So of course the tube's going to end up welded onto the plate like that, and I'll drill some holes for some screws to screw it down on the deck. Okay, so I've given this a bit of thought, because what I need to do is I need to transfer that angle onto the pipe, either as a mark or in some kind of fixture. And my issue is that, so I've got a hole saw, so I could cut a hole in this piece of wood and put the tube through like that. But when we look at the thickness of the wood relative to the angle that I need to cut, yeah, so those two pencil marks there and there are basically where the wood crosses into the width of the pipe. So of course the wood's basically not thick enough. If I had a thicker piece of wood, then it would be okay. But I don't have a hole saw that will go through my thicker piece of wood. So I think my only option is to actually 3D print a fixture of some kind that I can then either slide over the end of the pipe or sit the pipe into to then mark it. Then I can put it in the vise and cut it with my angle grinder. So I'm going to measure that angle. I've managed to find what I hope to be an accurate protractor type device. I'm going to use this to measure the angle. Yes, that gives us an angle of roughly, well, I say roughly, it looks like it's dead on, 27.5 degrees. I'll just write that on there so I know what I'm working with. So now I'm going to basically design a simple, and I mean very simple, fixture to allow me to mark and cut the pipe at the correct angle. Okay, so the software I'm using is Autodesk Fusion 360. I'm just going to fast forward through this part because it takes a little bit of time to create the design. But if you'd like to see a more detailed tutorial on the basics of 3D modeling in Fusion 360, then please leave a comment below and maybe I'll do a video on this in the future. Okay, so I've just imported the 3D model into the 3D printer's slicer software, which in this case is Creality Print. I'm just going to skip through this part again because it's not the main focus of the video, but I probably will do a 3D printing tutorial video in the near future. So stay tuned for that and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. Okay, so while we're waiting for the jig to 3D print, I'm going to fill in the old holes for the old brackets. So it feels counterintuitive, but the first step is to actually make the holes a little bit bigger. And what that does is it just helps to remove any contamination or loose debris that's within the hole. And next, I'm just going to remove some of the loose, sort of cracked gel coat that surrounds the holes, just so that it doesn't continue to crack in the future. And to do this, I'm just using a sanding drum on my rotary tool. Now I'm using a very small spherical tipped diamond grinding needle, just to basically create a circular pocket at the end of the crack at the very tip. And what that will do is it will just reduce the stress in that area to make sure it doesn't continue to propagate. I'm also opening out and beveling out the crack slightly as well, just to give the new resin something to actually bond into and key into. So moving on to the starboard side, I'm firstly going to remove the bracket using an impact driver just to loosen off the very corroded screw, and then I'm going to open out the holes as I did before, and then move on to grinding out the cracks. So after a bit more sanding, I've just realised that I need to countersink the holes, and what that does is, again, it just relieves the stress on the corner of the hole, just making it less likely to crack in that area in the future. Back onto the port side, I'm just going over the area with a fairly coarse sandpaper just to sort of really rough up the surface and give the new resin something to key into. And then I'm just finishing up by cleaning the area with some acetone, just to remove any contamination that might hinder the cure. Okay, so now I'm ready to fill the holes in. I'm just making up some polyester resin, so I'm using this Blue G Fiberglass resin, and I'm just going to pour out 10 milliliters into my measuring cup. I'm next going to add some MEKP catalyst at approximately 1 to 2%. Once I've mixed the catalyst into the resin, I then added some filler, which basically just thickens the uncured resin, which makes it easier to fill holes in, especially if they're on a vertical surface. It just stops it from running out. So now everything's thoroughly mixed, I'm then just going to draw some of the resin into my syringe and then use that to inject the resin directly into the hole. And just doing the same on the other side now. So once this is all cured, I'll sand it back so it's a nice flat surface. Okay, so the fixture or jig is now complete. It's not the best print quality, but I didn't dry the filament or anything, so yeah, I'm not too worried about that. As long as the angle is correct, that's all that matters. Okay, so trying the fixture just on the pipe, it looks like it's a pretty good fit. I'm going to go and offer it up to the current bracket just to make sure that the angle looks correct. So as you can see, comparing the fixture to the original bracket, it looks like a pretty good match in terms of the angle, so I'm quite happy with how that's turned out. My plan is to grip the pipe in the vise, mark it, and then I'll put the pipe further this way in the vise and then cut it. Yeah, so I think that's marked clearly enough for me to be able to cut it. I'll use some card just to protect the pipe. So as you can see, the pipe is actually moving slightly in the vise, and that's because I've deliberately left it a little bit looser than ideal, because I didn't want to risk damaging and crushing the pipe. Alright, so that doesn't look too bad. Let's just check it with the jig to see how the angle looks. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So I decided that I wasn't 100% happy with the original base plate template that I made, so I'm just making a new one. And now I'm just marking the tube to get the correct length for the bracket tube. Okay, so I've got my tube cut at the correct angle, and now I've got the length marked. There's our tube cut to length. Now I'm just going to remove the old bracket from the railing. This will enable me to check that the new bracket tube fits onto the end of the railing properly. So now that I've confirmed that the tube fits, I'm going to mark the positions of the holes that I'm going to need to drill for the fasteners to secure the railing to the bracket. Okay, so now I'm ready to start marking out the piece of plate that I'm going to use to make the base of the bracket. So I'm basically just going to make these dots into holes and then transfer that marking onto here. And I think what I'll also do is I'll actually, because I'm going to obviously got to make a pair of these, so I'm just going to double this up. Use the holes to bolt the two plates together, and then I should be able to cut the profiles to the same shape so that they're both consistent. Okay, so I've modified the template slightly as well, so I've just made it slightly shorter because I don't think it needed to be as long as it was. And semi-unintentionally it's ended up in the shape of a boat. So I'm just going to centre punch these holes using my automatic centre punch, just so that the drill doesn't wander about everywhere. Okay, so just about see those marks there. Now I'm going to put them back to back, so we end up with two mirrored parts, because the side with the film is obviously protected, so it should be the shinier side of the two. Okay, so that's the plate with its holes now. So I'm going to put another bolt in there just so it's nice and secure and they're not going to shift relative to each other. And then I'll start cutting the shape out. I'm just going to deburr the underside because it's left a bit of a burr there. So using a larger drill bit and just turning it by hand whilst applying some pressure, and we've got a nice deburred hole. Handy little trick that I learnt at school. So partly because I didn't have the correct mask to protect me against the harmful fumes from grinding stainless steel, I decided to do some of the cutting with a hacksaw. Okay, so I've got the rough shape, but I'm going to tidy it up using the bench grinder because I think that'll be a little bit easier. So now I'm really just using a combination of different techniques and pieces of equipment to achieve the final shape that I'm after. Alright, so I'm quite happy with the overall shape now. It's slightly different to my original template, but it doesn't really matter. The template was really just a rough guide. So yeah, I think I'll move on to giving it a bit of a chamfer, so getting rid of this sharp edge, just to make it look a bit more aesthetically pleasing. Okay, so we've now got a bit of a chamfer around the top surface or top edge of both plates. So now I'm just going to sand around the perimeter just to get a nice consistent finish. Okay, so that's the finish of the edge. I'm quite happy with it. It's not perfect, but because you can see there's still where I haven't cut this edge, you can see there's a little bit of a sort of undercut there, which I think was probably where the piece of plate that I'm using was cut using I guess a guillotine. So same on the back here as well. But other than that, it's quite a smooth finish, so yeah, I'm pretty pleased with that. Now I'm just giving the edges a bit of a sand, just to sand where I filed the chamfer. Probably should have done this before doing the actual edges, but it doesn't matter really. Okay, so after doing that, that looks a bit better, a bit cleaner. Now I'm deciding whether to sand the actual top face as well, because it's not quite a mirror finish. It's not rough, but it could be, yeah, it certainly could be smoother. I do quite like the finish on the edge here, so I guess if I start at maybe a, I don't know, 600 grit on here and see how that goes. Or what I might do actually is try it on the, I might separate them now and try it on the inside face just to see what it looks like before I commit to doing it on the top face. Okay, so we've got a nice pair of base plates for our brackets. Okay, so that's the 1000 grit. Let's see what happens. Yeah, that's quite nice actually. It's quite a nice finish. So I think I am going to commit to doing that on the top side. I decided to jump back a grade, so I've gone back to 600 just because there's a few deeper marks on there, so I want to try and get rid of those if I can. So basically I just continued sanding the plate with increasingly finer grades of abrasive paper until I had a finish that I was happy with. So the top one is the one that I haven't done yet, so it doesn't look massively different, but in person this just looks a little bit more finished than this one. This one's got a slightly duller finish to it. So yeah, I want to quickly do this one and then I'll countersink the holes. Right, so there's the finished base plates. So just going to give them a little bit of a wipe just so we can see. the end result of the polishing. Yeah, so it's pretty good. Happy with that. Yeah, so I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back over to the boat, sand the resin down that should now be cured. So I've got a nice flat surface to place the plate, and then what I'll do is I'll slide this onto the end of the railing, get it all in place. Then I can mark where these two holes need to be, because once I weld this onto here, I don't think I'm going to be able to hold this in the vise and be able to actually drill those two holes. So yeah, I think I'll do that. Alright, so now I've marked my hole positions on the tube. I'm going to mount the tube in the vise. Alright, so now I need to make a dimple there so that the drill bit can actually properly engage with the material rather than skidding around. So I'm going to try and use my centre punch. Okay, that's nicely marked now. So we can see I've turned those pen marks into actual divots. Okay, so I've got the tube in the drill press now. I've actually just remarked it slightly because it wasn't quite happy with the position. So I'm going to start with a centre drill just to make sure that the drill doesn't wander at all, so that we should get a nice accurate hole. What that's done is basically just enlarge those two divots just to make sure that the drill bit doesn't wander about. Okay, so we've got a 2.5mm drill, so I'm going to use that as a pilot hole. Now I'm just drilling the holes out to their final size, which is 5mm, and then countersinking, because I plan to use a fastener with an oval type head. Okay, so that's the tube with the two holes drilled. So next I'm just going to try and deburr the inside. So as we can see, if we look inside, there's a bit of a burr on the inside. So I'm just going to remove that because that will make it difficult to insert the railing. Now I'm just going to quickly try this on the actual railing just to make sure it fits before I weld it onto the plate, which is going to be the next step. That's a slightly unexpected problem. So I think all the clamping in the vise has kind of squashed this ever so slightly. So it seems tight here and here. So I'm just going to put it back in the vise, clamping this way, just to try and squash that back into shape. I've no idea if that's done the trick or not, but I guess what I could do is measure the internal diameter, or even the external actually, with my digital caliper, just to see how circular the part is. Of course, I don't know how circular it was to begin with, but we've got 25.54 in that direction, or 25.6 let's say, and then 25.17 that way. So I think I need to squash it a little bit more in that direction. Okay, so we've got 25.47, 25.19, well, yeah, 25.2. So we still need to go a little bit more. Now I'm just doing it completely by feel, so I've got no idea how much I'm deforming it by each time. 25.37 or 36. I'd say that's as good as I'm going to get it. Yeah, probably not going to get it any better than that. So I'm going to go and double check it again on the railing. Yep, so that now fits as it did before. Okay, so I'm happy with this now. It fits onto the railing quite nicely. Yeah, I think I'm ready to start welding it onto the plate. So my plan is to tack weld it in place indoors, and because I don't have an appropriate mask and my garage isn't that well ventilated, I'm going to actually do the seam weld outside, because one thing to note with welding stainless is it does give off some toxic fumes which I believe are carcinogenic. So yeah, I'll tack these two together, check the fit on the actual boat, and then once I'm happy I'll seam weld it, and then we'll get on with making the other one. But first I'm going to degrease the two parts, because there's been lots of cutting oil and so forth on this, and I'm sure that will interfere with the weld. So I've just got a engine and parts degreaser spray. I'm just going to use that with a bit of blue roll if I can find any. Just thought I'd quickly show you my welding equipment. So I'm going to be using this stainless steel welding wire, which is should be 316 grade. Yeah, 316, which is the same as the parent material. Got my automatic dimming welding mask, which is looking a bit dusty because I haven't used it in ages. Pair of welding gloves, and then I've got a Clark 110EN MIG Welder. Oh, and my gas is there, so I'm using Hobby Weld, which is a mixture of, I can't remember what actually, which is a mixture of CO2 and argon. I'm also wearing a set of fire retardant overalls as well, which I think is an important piece of safety gear, because yeah, you don't want to be catching fire. Alright, so that's my fixturing setup for doing the tack welds. I've just used a caliper clamp, or whatever this is called, just to hold the tube a bit more securely. So yeah, I'll get on and get those tacks done. Alright, so I've just double checked my welder's settings. I'm not going to go into too much detail with it, because honestly I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of winging it. I've welded a few things, but I'm very much self-taught. So I'm just going to start with sort of relatively mid-range settings, slightly under the middle wire speed. But yeah, I'm just going to have a go and see what happens. Okay, so there's my two tack welds. Just before I do the seam weld, I'm just going to go and take it over to the boat and offer it up to the railing and see how it fits, because this is kind of my last chance to make any adjustments if I need to. Okay, so now outside, excuse the noise of the birds and the rather unconventional setup. Now when you're welding outdoors, it's important to have a decent amount of shield gas flow, so I don't know if you can hear that, there's quite a strong flow there. It's not very windy today, so it shouldn't really matter too much. Okay, so it's definitely not the prettiest looking weld. Yeah. Yeah, it's looks a bit poor, to be honest, but I mean, it's functional. At least. I don't know what else how else to can describe it. Yeah, not overly pleased with that, but as I say, I'm very much a beginner, so I may actually remake this one, because obviously it's quite a visible part of the boat, and you know, I've done such a nice job of the plate and getting everything cut nicely. I think it'd be a shame for it to be let down by some terrible welding. So yeah. Alright, so after a quick wire brush, it looks a bit better, but it's still a bit lumpy bumpy. So I think rather than remaking it, which I think would be a shame because the amount of time I've spent on it, I don't know what them birds are doing. Yeah, I think what I'll do is I'll just try and tidy it up with a grinder. Alright, so a couple of things I've learned from that first weld. I think I should have done the tack welds at the end of where I was going to do the seam weld, because having done it in the middle, it meant I kind of needed to do, well, I suppose 3 separate or 4 separate welds in a way, whereas if I'd have done the tack welds further round the back, or perhaps at the very tip, then I wouldn't have needed to sort of stop and start as much, which would have given a much more consistent weld seam. So that's one thing. And also, because of the spatter that's happened, I'm going to have to sort of sand away some of the little blobs. So I think it was a bit pointless sanding and polishing the plate as much as I did, because I'm just going to have to go over it again, basically. So yeah, just a couple of points I've learnt there. So I'm not an expert at doing these things. I'm just having a go and learning as I go along, really. Yeah, obviously, if you've got any tips or any suggestions of how maybe I could do things differently, then I'm always open to suggestions and to develop my skills. So yeah, feel free to leave a comment if you've got any advice. Yeah, so I think the settings are about right. So I'm going to have a go at welding the second bracket, and hopefully we'll get a better result this time. Okay, so I've got everything set up to weld to tack the second tube to the base plate. So this time I'm gonna make sure that the tack welds are in a bit of a better position, because I think so that I can do a continuous weld all the way around. Okay, so that's tacked in place. So I'm going to take this outside and do the seam weld. So at the start you can see that I'm just doing what I call a dry practice run. So basically just planning where I'm going to actually have my hands and how I'm going to hold the torch, and just enables you to kind of make sure that you can get access to the weld joint, which again will just help you make a more consistent weld when you actually do the real thing. Okay, so second time round, a much better result. So there it is after a quick wire brush. There's a few blobs of spatter, but yeah, I think overall it looks a lot better than the first one. Given how well the second bracket turned out, I think I'm going to cut the first one off and try again, because I've also noticed that the position of the tube is slightly different between the two. The base plate looks like it should be reusable. I think I'll just sand this down and make it look nice and smooth again. Okay, so that's basically the finished article. The weld is it's just about acceptable for me, I think. I think I'm, you know, it's not worth me starting again for that, but I'm still not quite 100% happy with it. So, bit of a shame, but perhaps when my welding skills get better, I might try and make another one. But yeah, for now, that will do. Bit more of a close-up view. So they've both got their flaws. Neither of them are perfect. I think the second one, unsurprisingly, is slightly better than the first. This one's the first, after obviously I reworked it. But yeah, I mean, I'm just about satisfied with them, to be honest, in terms of the quality of the welds. That's the main thing that lets them down. So yeah, I think that's definitely something I need to practice. So now I'm just installing the first bracket onto the boat. I had to clean up the 2 holes in the tube where the railing mounts, because I think one of the holes didn't quite line up perfectly. And I'm just using some Marine Flex polyurethane sealant just to seal the screw holes between the base plate and the deck. And the reason I'm doing that is to just prevent any moisture ingress over time, because that will potentially compromise the fiberglass. Okay, so I'm now doing the starboard side or right hand side of the boat. So I'm just repeating the exact same steps as I've just done on the port side. Main difference being that I'm having to take the old bracket off first, because I haven't actually done that yet on this side. Okay, so that's both brackets installed, so both railings are now secure. As I've said several times now throughout the video, I'm not 100% happy with the welds, but I'm learning as I go really, so I wanted to show the end result in its true form. So here it is, and final thoughts. I think if I was to do it again next time, I'd definitely do a few practice welds on the same kind of material that I'm going to be making the actual part out of. I think that's really key, because it just helps you to make sure that you've got your settings correct, and also just check the settings each time you start to weld, especially in my case where I was moving the welder from inside the garage to outside. Obviously there's always a risk that something's going to get knocked, and obviously that did let down the quality of the weld on the rework of the first bracket. And I think also just to get the dimensions and the actual geometry of the parts a bit more consistent, I think I probably would have made a bit more fixturing just to hold things in place more accurately as I do the tack welds. I think this is the first thing that I've actually kind of fabricated out of metal from scratch, so yeah, overall I'm quite pleased with how it turned out. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video and found it interesting or useful, or both. So if you did, please leave a thumbs up, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please subscribe. So yeah, stay tuned, and I'll hopefully see you in another video. Thanks for watching.